Hello there and welcome to Series 2 of Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers. And since I'm starting a new series here, I thought it'd be a good idea to look back on what we completed in the first series, what we accomplished, what got built up, and how things went. And so, of course, we started off on Lignumis with a traditional crash landing with a spaceship, and we built up a base over here, which was to allow us to sort of escape from this little moon and get down to Nauvis to start the game proper. And doing that was very much a burner phase of the game, because we didn't have any electricity on this moon at all at any point before we left. And so we were limited to doing things like running burner drills to pull up stone and peat, and we could then burn the peat in order to keep the drills running. I believe Mark set this area up down here to grow large quantities of wood for us to use for a lot of the construction we're doing. And similarly over here, Tristan set up a large gold production area, where we are. I say gold production area. We're actually growing gold bacteria or gold stromatolite plants over here with the agricultural towers, which we can then harvest and get gold ore and some side effects out. And those products allowed us to, then process the gold ore down into getting actual gold plates and a certain amount of steam out of that as well. And then with all those basic ingredients, we're able to make wooden science packs, which are made out of wooden gears and stone bricks. So put them into a wooden assembly machine. And the wooden gears are made out of lumber that we could make in a lumber mill. And the lumber mill is one of those space age style improved factories. So instead of being just a small building that runs at a speed of whatever and produces an output, these ones are very specialised buildings. So these ones just deal with wood. And I think we could also have had one of these making the wooden gears as well if we'd wanted to. But they get you that glorious plus 50% productivity, and they run much faster as well. This, as you can see, runs at a glorious crafting speed of 2, which is pretty slow, but is actually absolutely fantastic when you consider that these ones run at a speed of 1/4. So that was our first science pack. We fed it into some wooden burner labs, using wooden burner inserters and wooden burner absolutely everything, and that allowed us to get started on the research. Then we discovered there was another pack we were going to need, so we started making the steam science packs, and there's over here. That was made out of the gold plates, so we started needing those in slightly larger quantities. And also they use steam, which is interesting because there are a couple of ways this can be done. Out here on Lignumis, you use the steam-powered assembly machines, which run at a glorious speed of 0.5, so they're a bit better, but they require a bit more infrastructure to power them, yada yada yada. Or alternatively, you can make them in normal Nauvian assembly machines, but then you have to pipe in the steam separately. And that is worth doing, but once you've got those machines available, because those machines are significantly faster, even if that then still means you need to bring the steam in, and you can't pipe it straight through all the way up the middle like we've done here. So that was the second science pack, which we fed back over to the labs over here, and we're able to get lots of science going, up to and including the wooden rocket silo, which it's a wooden rocket silo. It gets wrecked every time you launch, which is fun. But with that, we were able to then we had to make a number of these because we needed one each, but we're able to feed in all the ingredients then to make the wooden rocket parts, and wood juice to use as fuel, and so on and so on. And from that, we were then able to blast off and leave Lignumis behind. We did do a little bit of defensive stuff around the edge first, but like putting in a wall all the way around the edge with this wooden fence, and then putting in some turrets to keep the place safe. But essentially, we were happy to just mothball this planetoid and just go off to Nauvis and get started down there. Nauvis kicked off in a fairly traditional way. We had a little sort of starter area down here where we got things up and running just about. And interestingly, it was a little bit easier than it normally would be because we were able to bring over a load of, granted, wooden assembly machines, which aren't great, but they were good, but they were enough to get us started, and a load of wooden belts, which again, very, very slow, but again, could get us started. And so that made the initial Kickstarter on Nauvis a little bit simpler and a little bit quicker to get going than normal, because normally you end up trying to dig up at least a decent quantity of iron ore and so on, and then scraping a few belts together and a few assembly machines, and then trying to decide, well, do I want to start off by making more belts, or do I want to make gears, green stone, all of these things. You have all these decisions to make when you're in the very, very early stages of the game. Whereas with coming in from Lignumis, it was in a way much easier because we didn't have to worry about the exactly what orders to get things going in to start with. Nauvis quickly expanded into a fairly traditional main bus design, as you can see here, carefully planned out by Mark, who said wanted production to be above the main bus in here, and then smelting down here. So we've got a huge area of smelters, and we're all running a lot of these on quite old technology down here. Admittedly, the steel ones are running in steel furnaces, but we're still using a lot of the stone furnaces because it didn't really feel worth upgrading. One of the upgrades we did do was to introduce crushing, and this gets an extra 26% out of the amount of ore that's coming in, because we found that we were ripping through huge amounts of ore. Now, this is always the way in Factorio. You do get through a lot of resources, a lot of iron, a lot of copper. But when you've got 5 people playing and everyone trying to build at the same time, you get through even more. So we wanted to boost this as far as we could and get as much iron coming through as possible. And we were just desperately trying to keep the system happy, feeding more and more iron in. And as you can see here, we're still short of it. There's two belts running in, well, kind of 2 belts running in, and they're flowing solidly, which means we don't have enough at the moment. And this meant we did a lot of expansion as well. So we had our starter patches down here, which we ripped through quite quickly. I suspect actually there's coal, copper and iron there. They're still being used at this point. But we ripped through those pretty quickly and had to expand out to coal. There's a nice big iron patch up here, more coal as well. Even more coal over here to the side. And because at this point we're generating all of our electricity with steam power. And we also need a supply of wood. Because one of the things about having Lignumis installed is it means you have all these earlier phases of things. So we need to make the wooden belts in order to make the yellow belts, in order to make the red belts, in order to make potentially the blue belts later. You need to make wooden inserters before you can make the normal inserters. You need to make wooden circuits for a few things. Thankfully, you don't need to make wooden circuits in order to make green circuits. That would have been a bit too much for sanity, I suspect. But it did put in a little bit of an extra challenge there and for all of that. Nauvis expanded and expanded, and eventually we got rid of the whole main bus design and moved over to a city block after we got, I think, the first 3 or 4 Nauvian science packs up and running. And that allowed us to invent railways and all the other sort of bits and pieces you need for this sort of system. We didn't have cliff explosives, of course, but there is a bit of a loophole with the nanobots, which allowed us to expand out a bit more easily than we otherwise would. But we've got important things like landfill, the railway systems, as I say, we've got LTN up and running, and this allowed us to expand out to this full-on city block you can see here. And each one of these blocks has train stations around the edge of it, so we can bring in the various ingredients that are required for the block, a space in the middle that we can build up to do whatever construction is required in there, in this case red circuits, and then another station for them to be taken away. Different blocks will have slightly different layouts, so this one, for example, only has one input of the iron ore coming in here, then we're crushing that down, but it's got 2 outputs, because we need to be able to get rid of crushed iron down here and sand over here, but something seems to have gone a bit wrong with the filtering down here. For some reason, we seem to have got a load of sand down here into these chests, and it looks like we're missing a sand remover down here. So there should be an additional one of these splitters in there like that to pull out the sand from that bit and take it off to the other station. And we've used LTM priorities here. So for example, this station has because it's a byproduct, we put in an extra priority modifier of +10. So that means we'll take sand from here before we'll take it from, there's probably another station somewhere where it's bringing in stone and crushing it down to sand, just in case. But if there's enough to take, we'll always take from here first. And that's very, very nice. And from this, we've basically produced everything we need. We've tried to have the city blocks being fairly specialised. For example, down here we've got a block that takes in engines and produces electric engines. It also needs to bring in lube and green circuits as well, and that works out quite nicely because we're using all 4 stations around the place and then producing the electric engines that can be taken away to be made into whatever is required. But in a few cases we've needed to have slightly more inputs than that. So for example, down here I built up this utility science production area where we're bringing in green circuits and blue circuits, and in theory we'd be bringing in low density structures, but I think we're very, very short of copper on this planet at the moment. And then up here we're bringing in the electric engines, steel and batteries, and all of those are fed in to make the flying robot frames, some of which we're shipping out in another station, and also the blue science packs that we can then ship out and down this way. And this has ground to a halt because we've run out of low density structures, and it's a little bit of a problem. We have just researched low density structure productivity too though, so that's definitely going to help with producing additional low density structures as we need them. Other exciting areas around here, which you'll have seen in the end videos from series 1 if you've watched all of those, is we've got a large robo mall area down here that brings in supplies of basically everything. They get brought in, dumped into purple chests, and then which unloads them into the yellow chests over here. They can then get passed out to whatever machine is required to build the thing that we need. At the moment it looks like we've been quite busy with combat because there's some red and yellow ammo and brown ammo being built over here. That's another telescopic recipe. You need to make wooden ammo in order to make yellow ammo in order to make red ammo. And there's some military stuff being built up here, like artillery shells and artillery wagons and cliff explosives and so on and so on. So we've clearly been doing some expansion recently. Oh, and laser turrets as well. Lovely. And we can easily spot which things are under construction at the moment because their lights come on, which is very nice. It's even more obvious at night, but I've turned the lights on for the purposes of making this video, so you can't actually see that at the moment. Sorry about that. And this mall area is very, very close to the rocket silos up top here, so we can ship anything up that we need to either ship out to another planet or to make any of the spaceships we want. We've got a nice healthy wall system running around the outside. We've upgraded to green ammo now. However, we've also got quite a lot of turrets that still have red ammo in them, but we're gradually upgrading those, switching them over to green ammo as is required, and then some flame turrets as backup as well. We haven't got the artillery up and running yet, which is why there's still quite a lot of biter nests very, very close to our walls. We are doing a very, very bad job of defending our pollution cloud at the moment. As you can see, the biters are dealing with the pollution for us, which is not quite the way we want to deal with pollution. But yes, we'll be eventually sending around some artillery trains to go and blow the bejesus out, or every single biter within artillery range. That's going to put quite a lot of strain on all of the defences, but it's going to be worth it, and some of them have been strengthened up a little bit with massive quantities of laser turrets, which is why we seem to be a bit short of them. But yes, as it is, we are getting quite a lot of aggro, should we say, from the biters. They're coming in and attacking. We're defeating them with the flame turrets, but the problem is they are managing to do a bit of damage to the walls, like this. There's a piece of wall being lost here, and then as the bots come out to repair the walls or replace them, then sometimes the biters do a bit of damage to that. So we are getting some damage and some destruction being done to the factory, but it's only walls and bots at the moment, which is not the end of the world. We're sort of okay with that, but it is a bit of a shame, and we're looking forward to that being cleared out. I mean, you can see there's another attack coming in down here, and the Dragon Seeds do an excellent job of slowing them down. The flame turrets can then absolutely pulverise them, but then we do have to send bots out to then repair the walls that have been damaged by the biters. So it's not quite perfect, but it's doing pretty well. While this was still being built up, we also went out to Muluna, which is the other moon of Nauvis. And these are very, very easy to get to, because the space route between Nauvis and either Muluna or Lignumis is very, very safe. There's no actual rocks that can damage your ship, which is why our Muluna transport has absolutely no defences on it. It is just a platform that can drift vaguely through space, collect science packs, and then carry them back over to where they're needed. Muluna is an interesting planetoid, so it has the patches of asteroid chunks. So here, for example, we're digging up carbonic meteorite chunks. Here we're digging up the oxide meteorite chunks, and up here we're digging up the metallic ones. There's also a little patch of stone as well. And with our starter patches all being quite so crammed together like this did mean things were a little bit difficult, and we had to have sortometrons going down here, and it was fiddly. And to be honest, this never really worked very well until we expanded out and went up to having carbonic asteroid chunks coming in from up here, metallic ones coming in from I'm not sure where, but I thought we did. There's some oxide chunks over here as well. Maybe we didn't actually need to expand out to find other ones. We were talking about it, but it looks like we haven't actually expanded out. We've got better at sorting them out and trying to use them in the right sort of proportions and prioritising things a bit better and so on. And so Mike set up a large crushing area down here that is dealing with all of the incoming rock types. We've also got anorthite ore chunks as well. That sort of contains aluminium. And then those are all being dealt with over here. We're producing the various resources. And then, well, we've got out of that, we've got iron ore coming out, we've got a bit of stone coming out, we've got ice, we've got carbon, we've got coal, and we've got and sand as well. And we're able to then sort of process all of those down. And down here we are we're crushing some of the stone into sand, because that's what we actually need in small quantities. They're cooking the iron ore into iron plates and steel, as you'd expect. The anorthite is being made into aluminium, making the sand into glass, and that's then allowing us to make all of the bits and pieces that you need for a normal factory. We've got green circuits coming through here because there is an alternative recipe that allows you to make the basic cables from aluminium instead, which is kind of accurate. We did used to make out wiring out of aluminium for houses at the very least, except I think that was mostly due to a copper shortage after World War II, and so we've basically stopped doing that because I'm not sure actually. It's either because the houses tended to burn down because it overheated, or because it was actually more expensive once you had an actual ready supply of copper available. I'll have to look that one up and put it in a note on the video. But that then allowed us to have a basic bot wall going on over here. So we're bringing in essentials like iron and iron gears and pipes and things to make an enormous quantity of engines for some reason. Do we need those for something? Do we need those for something? No, we're just feeding them onto a belt for no apparent reason. And then we have a fairly traditional bottom wall over here that's making the various bits and pieces that are needed to build the rest of the factory. The biggest challenge on this planet was the wood cycle, though. So in theory, Muluna is going to require wood, because you're going to need it in order to pass it down here, in order to make the plastic, in order to make the red circuits, in order to make the blue circuits, in order to allow your rockets to leave. However, because we're playing with Lignumis, we have those telescopic recipes that I mentioned earlier. That means you also need wood in order to make all of your belts, and that made expanding very, very difficult early on, because we didn't have very much wood available, because it's a very, very slow process to get going. You have to melt ice in order to get water, you have to electrolyse the water in order to get oxygen and some hydrogen, which I think we're just blowing off into the lack of atmosphere because we didn't need that, and then you burn carbon in presence of oxygen in these machines in order to make carbon dioxide, and then feed the carbon dioxide and the water initially into a chemical plant in order to grow trees in a chemical plant, which is incredibly slow. I think it takes about 20 minutes to run the recipe. And then you get a little bit of wood out, which you can then turn into seeds or belts if you're absolutely desperate, or more usefully, you can then pass that up into another chemical plant that's doing this recipe, where you're making actual trees out of wood and seeds and more water. And then those those actual trees can be fed over into one of the machines over here, down here, and you can use those to make a sealed greenhouse wood growing. So you take in a sealed greenhouse, which takes a quantity of basic stuff. That's not too bad. All of that stuff we can make fairly easily because it's all metals. But then the sealed greenhouse wood growing, you required a load of trees as well, and those were expensive because it's about 100 wood to make a tree. So it took forever to get those going. But once you've got one of these sealed greenhouses, you can then drop that in here, and you'll notice that's got a crafting speed of 10. That brings it down from being a 20-minute build to being a 2-minute build, which is much, much better. And so you then relatively quickly make some more wood, which you can then use to make some more trees, which you can then use to make another greenhouse, which you use to make the trees a bit more quickly. And then it starts to spiral. But the initial bootstrapping phase of trying to get your first greenhouses up and running takes a very, very long time, especially as during that time everyone is clamoring, saying they need wood. They absolutely desperately need wood because they want to make some belts and they want to get some basic infrastructure up and running, and it's all a bit sort of painful in the early stages. Now, yeah, sure, you can deliver a load of belts and things in from Nauvis, and in theory that's what we should have done, but we were kind of in the stage of moving over from the bus system over to the new city block system at this point, and Nauvis was very, very under-spec'd and wasn't capable of launching rockets very quickly, and so, to be honest, we went over to Muluna a bit too early. We should have carried on building on Nauvis and got the full city block system up and running, and then been able to launch rockets at a huge rate and be able to supply our outpost much more quickly. And we're going to be doing that with the future ones when we go out to Vulcanus. We're going to be a lot more prepared there and a lot more able to ship ingredients out to get things up and running. But all of the inner planets, you are in theory supposed to be able to get started from absolutely nothing, and we sort of kind of did, and so it worked. We were able to build up all of this stuff, and then it was just a case of expanding more and more and more ice melting in order to get more and more and more water to grow more and more and more and more and more trees. And then those can be passed through here, where we then churn through some of them in order to make the seeds to carry on growing trees, and that's the priority, as you can see with this splitter down here. But then the rest of it can be fed over here, where we can then crush it and pulverise it and turn it into petroleum gas, which we can then turn into sulphur to sulphuric acid to loop back round in order to then turn the crushed wood into cellulose again, because that requires the sulphuric acid. Fortunately, we were given a little bit of sulphur on this planet in a drop pod to allow us to bootstrap this whole thing. But once you've got it going, each time the sulphur loops round this system, you do get something like 7 times as much coming through. So it expands very, very quickly once you've got it up and running. Once you've got that going, you can then use some of the sulphuric acid as a lower priority to go off and do things like uranium mining, and you can use the petroleum gas that can then be passed off down here along with a load more cellulose in order to start making plastic in a not very traditional way. This is, I suppose it's fairly close. Traditionally you use petroleum gas and coal. Here we're using petroleum gas and cellulose, which is also a kind of woody thing. So yeah, that produces plastic, and that can come around here, and then we're making the green circuits, again with the aluminium for the wires, making green circuits in an almost traditional way, and then red circuits in a pretty traditional way, except for the aluminium feed, and then the blue circuits in exactly the normal way. And so that just works. We can then pump out blue circuits, which allow us to, which can come down here to allow us to start making the rockets. Over here as well, we also need to think about science packs. We need to think about low density structures, and there's a new recipe for those which involves aluminium, which makes a lot of sense because aluminium is a very light, a very undense metal. So we can use the aluminium and plastic and steel to make low density structures, again for the rockets, and also rocket fuel using the ALICE, which is aluminium ice method of making rocket fuel, which apparently is a real thing. So we can bring in the alumina and the ice over here. That can make rocket fuel. We pump that out in once again into the rocket silos. And down here we're then making the science packs. And the thing that I find quite amusing about this whole system is that we've got this tiny, tiny area down here making the actual science packs, which is the whole reason we came to this planet. The reason you come here, really, at this stage at least, is to make the space science packs, which you can't do in space in Planetary Pioneers, because you need to use some of the space science packs to discover how to crush asteroids in space. And so you need to go to Muluna, where you can find chunks of those asteroids on the ground. And so that requires us to bring in ice, which comes straight out of chunks when you crush them. It requires iron plates, which, well, you get the iron ore out of the chunks when you crush them, and then you can cook that straight into iron plates. It requires glass, which you get from getting the ice, because you get sand and you cook that, and carbon, which comes straight out of the carbonic chunks. So all of these, making the science packs just requires this sort of 10 machines over here, and a little bit of this crushing facility over here, and the mining. All of this stuff, pretty much, is just for making infrastructure and rockets. And it's kind of crazy that we've built up all of this stuff when actually the only bit that we really care about is this part here. Especially as one of the things we could do is bring in the blue circuits and the low density structures and the rocket fuel by spaceship, drop them down and launch back up again. So in a way we could almost get away with a really tiny base out here. However, I personally like to have my factories be very, very self-contained. So I don't mind bringing in some of the resources to get the place up and running. So for example, bringing in a load of belts and assembly machines and so on to get you bootstrapped and get things up and running so you don't have to try and just build everything from absolute scratch. That's absolutely fine. But once the system is up and running, I would like it to be able to make its own rockets so we can ship out the science packs from here without needing anything coming in from anywhere else. Now in the future that's probably going to change, and we'll modernise systems, and we'll go, well actually there's no point in trying to make the blue circuits here, it's easier to do it on Mumble Planet. But for now, for the initial expansion, I like to see each planet being self-contained and being able to produce its own resources and ship them out all by itself. Muluna came together quite nicely. We were able to build up all the systems out here. We've even put in nuclear power, which is another load on the ice because it requires water, but never mind. The only big problems we had with it was the wood production initially, as I mentioned earlier, although now we've got plenty of it because we've expanded it to a point where it's okay. But linked to that was we had quite a lot of trouble with the ice production, because when you crush down the oxide asteroid chunks, you get out ice and sand. And for quite a long time we had too much sand coming out, and that was largely because we were trying to use too much ice, because we were trying to get because we were melting enormous quantities of it to try and get the wood up and running, and we were then using lots and lots of wood to make all of the belts and all the other resources and things going on around here, and we had quite a lot of other things going on the planet. I think at one point Mike tried to make a spaceship in orbit around here, which is why we got all of these things, and that's more load on the blue circuits and on the low density structures and the electric motors, which maybe require, I can't remember whether they require water in any shape or form to make them, but that was putting a lot of load on the system, and that meant we weren't able to produce anything like enough ice to keep things happy. Now one of the things that did help quite a lot was we discovered there's actually two alternative recipes for greenhouse tree growth. You can either do the water saving one, which uses 250 water for every 40 wood you produce, or there is alternatively the standard one, greenhouse tree growth, which uses 500 water, so twice as much for each 40 wood you make. The difference between those though is the crafting time. So you'll see this one is a 300-second craft, this one's a 600-second craft. So when there's a shortage of water, the trees grow more slowly basically, which is fair enough, makes a certain amount of sense. Once we found that and switched over to that one, well that saved half the water, so that meant we were using half as much ice. So that was a big improvement, made an enormous difference. But it didn't quite fix it. But we were then able to sort it out by putting productivity modules in all the machines melting ice along here. And that means we're getting out an extra 12% from there. And I thought we put productivity modules in another stage as well, but it doesn't look like we have. But that meant we were able to use up the sand fast enough for making the glass, which then goes over to make the science packs, fast enough to make all of the rocket parts that are required to make the rockets to take those science packs away. So as a sort of a closed system, if you're making space science packs and the rockets to launch them up to a spaceship, you use up enough sand in order to make the glass that the ice can carry on being made constantly and the system just works. If you start trying to do too many other things on the planet, then you start running into problems, and we end up with massive quantities of glass being stored over here because we don't know what to do with it otherwise. It is interesting to note that now that we're not doing anything else with Muluna, we've got to a point where there is actually a slight shortage of sand, and we may need to start feeding stone in here to crush it down to sand in order to make a bit more of it. And if we do, then we might just fix that when we come to it, because at the moment, if you see here, we've got a belt turned away, so I can rotate that belt, and then we'll dump a load of stone in here, which will flow through here, along here like this, and then go in to be crushed. We would need to put in some sort of intelligence on this system, I think, in order to make sure that we aren't producing a load of stone that we don't need, and therefore causing problems over here. But this is what we can do in order to make things a little better if we need to. However, as you noticed over here, we do have a large stockpile of glass available, so we'll feed this in as maybe as a higher priority. It's a bit of a weird setup, to be honest, for which I blame Mike, which seems fairly fair. So speaking of wanting our planets to be fairly self-sufficient, we discovered some way into building up on Nauvis that the later researches start requiring wood science and steam science, the Lignumian sciences once again. And so, well, wooden science is very, very easy. That's just wooden gears and stone bricks. So we're making that on Nauvis because why wouldn't you? We've got all the resources there. It's really, really cheap. However, the steam science requires gold, and so that means we have to go out to Lignumis, where we are growing the gold, as you can see, and then apparently not processing it. So this this solar system over here is broken, so I'm going to need to look at that at some point. But yes, we're making gold, so we wanted to be able to ship this out from Lignumis over to Nauvis. And so I came back to Lignumis and did some modernisation. The first part of that, which Sophia actually did when he came out here to defend the planetoid because the wrigglers had expanded and were causing trouble, was to expand out to allow this planet to have some electricity. And that's done through solar and accumulators, which is nice and simple. And that means we're now able to have some laser turrets around the outside of here, which is amazing because the laser turrets only require electricity and are so much better than the basic wooden gun turrets using basic wooden ammo. As you can see, these do 12 damage per shot. The laser turrets do 66 damage per shot. There's no contest, and the laser turrets are longer range. They're just better in every possible way, except for the fact they slurp up a load of electricity. We could have brought better ammunition, better gun turrets over, but we don't want to be importing ammunition. We want to be using the homegrown stuff as much as we can, and homegrown electricity works quite nicely for that. So yeah, the laser turrets are amazing. But that meant having power over here meant that we could then upgrade to using the blue assembly machines over here. And as you can see, this requires a pipe of steam running all the way up the side of it here to run all of those. And then we're bringing in the gold and then outputting the steam science packs. Those can then be run down belts over here, and we've got rocket silos happening. And the rocket silos were interesting. So there's no actual way to make a rocket silo on this planet. That's not quite true. There's no way to make the ingredients for a rocket silo on this planet because a rocket silo requires steel plate. There's no iron, so we had to import that. It requires processing units, which we can make on this planet, interestingly. It requires electric engine units, which I think we can't make because it requires copper and maybe that might be maybe aluminium. But anyway, you can't make them on this planet. It requires pipes. You can't make those on this planet. It requires concrete mix, which you can't make on this planet. You've got the stone for that, but you don't have the iron ore. So all of these I made over on Muluna, shipped them over to here, dropped them in on this like this, and then the concrete mix came over in barrels. We dropped all that in here, and then we're able to make the rocket silos. And so we tucked a few of those in over here for taking away the steam science packs. Lovely. But you do still need to provide blue circuits, rocket fuel, and low density structures in order to make the actual rocket parts. And so that requires some careful thought, because normally you need oil in order to make rocket fuel. You need all kinds of things. You need plastic, you need copper, you need iron, you need plastic, you need sulfuric acid in order to make blue circuits. You need steel and copper and plastic in order to make the low density structures. But fortunately, there are some alternative recipes on Lignumis. So I started off over here, and this is actually the Mulunan recipe for making plastic, because I made a mistake and didn't read things through properly. Because basically, it's making it from wood, and wood is a thing that we have plenty of on Lignumis. It's a very, very woody moon. So okay, we'll bring in the wood over here. We'll crush that down. We'll turn it into the cellulose. We'll turn that into petroleum gas, which will allow us to We can even make solid fuel out of that, and we can make plastic. And it did work, except that in order to make the sulfuric acid, you do need to bring in iron. And you don't have iron on this planet, so I started bringing that in from space, which sort of breaks the rule a little bit. And it was a bit of a shame, but it was the only way I could see to do it, because you can't make iron on this planet, and you can't make sulfuric acid out of gold. Turns out, I'm a muppet, and this isn't how you make plastic on Lignumis. There is an alternative recipe over here using the gold stromatolite seeds and peat to make these, to make the Cupriovidus nicators, which are kind of bacteria-y sort of thing, which you can then feed into these machines over here, which stir it round, breeding it up to make lots and lots of it, and you can then turn that into plastic. These do have a spoil time on them, and then they'll eventually turn into the dead grey ones here that you can see. But those can also be turned into plastic, so that's not too much of a problem, as long as you don't kill them all off to the extent that you don't have any more Cupriovidus available. It also requires wood juice, but that's just steam and wood, so that wasn't a problem either. And so we're able to make the plastic here, and that's shipped out over here, up to here, to be made into low-density structures, using the Lignumian recipe, which takes in lumber and gold and plastic, and makes low-density structures. Now, I kind of object to this one on general principles, because both wood and gold are incredibly dense, and plastic, okay, sure, but the other two are incredibly dense, so making low-density structures out of those doesn't make much sense. Fortunately, though, Lignumis is a very small planetoid, and so it's much, much easier for a rocket to take off from here, so I guess it doesn't matter if the low-density structures are a bit denser than expected. The next step of the process is then making the blue circuits, which also have a Lignumian recipe, which is gold cable and plastic and wooden circuit boards to make blue circuits. And this is a really, really good recipe recipe, I think. And so I think we're going to be expanding at some point to produce enormous quantities of blue circuits on Lignumis and ship them out by rockets to wherever they're required. Now, we're not doing that just yet, because at the moment there is an update required for Lignumis, shall we say, which has been made, we just haven't installed it yet, because in the current state, you can only fit 36 blue circuits onto a rocket, and that should be either 100 or 200, I forget which. So we haven't been doing this yet, but once we've installed the update that gives us that fix, we'll then be able to start thinking about shipping out the blue circuits from this planetoid and sending them out to everywhere where we need them. And this is going to hopefully be much easier than making them on Nauvis and maybe even some of the other planets as well, so we'll see how that goes. The other thing that we've added in on Lignumis is these deep mining drills over here, and these allow you to produce gold out of these gold patches instead of having to grow it with the stromatolite plants. So that's going to be significantly better when you want to have a steady flow coming out and don't want to have to deal with the weird vagaries of organic systems. And so that brings you basically up to date. Minor spoilers for the upcoming series. We are then going to go out to Vulcanus, where we have built a factory. I should be talking about this in a lot more detail in the upcoming videos, but this is where we are at the moment. And so that has been a summary of Series 1 of Planetary Pioneers. I hope you found that nice and interesting. I'll be back tomorrow for another video where I'll be talking about how things started out on Vulcanus and how they've been going. We'll be back on Monday for another stream where we should be carrying on dealing with all of these planets out there and trying to expand out across the solar system, making the factory bigger and finding more and more science packs. There's about 20 planets and about 30 science packs to find, so it's going to take us a little while. At the time of recording, we're on to number 5, so yeah, there's still some way to go. I will also be back on Wednesday where I should be playing some more Foundry. That's going very nicely at the moment. I've been expanding out my empire, we've got better transport systems, things are going really well. So if you want to see Factorio with a third dimension and a sort of a Minecraft world, come along and join in for that. And so yes, for all of that, please make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on anything. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.